Hey, it's Chris Aiken from the Classic Metal Show, and I want to invite you to my first ever public book signing. I'll be doing a special reading, question and answer session, and a signing of my new book, Little Victories, A Tale of Divorce, Debauchery, and Finding Happiness on Thursday, March 20th at Visible Voice Books, located at 1023 Kenilworth Road, Cleveland, Ohio, 44113. I'll have a limited supply of Little Victories on hand to sign. I'll be reading selections from Little Victories, as well as telling stories and reading some material that was left out of Little Victories. I'll end with a Q&A session that will be a no-holds-barred affair. The signing will be from 7 to 9 p.m. at Visible Voice Books, 1023 Kenilworth Road, Cleveland, Ohio, 44113. Come out, have some fun, and be a part of a rare appearance from me, Chris Aiken. All right, it is your Classic Metal Show right here on theclassicmetalshow.com. That is brand new stuff by one of my favorite bands, the mighty Pro-Pain, with a tune called Death Wish from their new record, The Final Revolution. And on the phone, we've got a longtime member of Pro-Pain, I guess the guy that is Pro-Pain, and somebody that I have sort of a personal friendship with, the one, the only, Gary Meskil. Gary, how are you, man?
Hey, how you doing, man? Great to hear from you. How are you?
Excellent, man. Well,
Good.
Well, Gary, I got to tell you, man, getting a Pro-Pain record, while it's definitely not the same kind of music, it's almost like getting an AC/DC record. You know what you're going to get. It's going to be good, and it's like you don't even have to wonder, God, is there going to be a ballad on this, or man, is this going to be different? Right. It is Pro-Pain from the start, and this one is no different, man.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard those comparisons before, to bands like AC/DC and Motorhead and stuff like that, in that, one knows sort of what they're getting into when they purchase a Pro-Pain CD, like AC/DC and Motorhead.
Sure.
And, certain people have criticized us for, staying so consistent with our sound, but I really think that's what makes bands original, is that, you stick to your foundations, at least to a certain degree, because that is your sound, and, there are people, if you look to people that have their own signature tone or sound, such as like Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath, he didn't get his signature tone from switching guitars every record,
Sure.
And we're no different. We it took us a little while to sort of hone our sound. And once we got in the zone and in a good place, we sort of wanted to maintain those that foundational tone, which made Pro-Pain. And we experiment with our tone every now and then, and we stretch the parameters a little bit, but the core is still the same, and that's what the fans really love about us.
Well, sure, man. And I mean, let's face it, what band has been able to change their sound and be successful? There it is.
Not too many. I mean, there are a lot of more experimental types of metal bands these days. A lot of the young bands, especially, and but that's sort of their thing, and they're building a foundation based on that experimentational sound.
Sure.
So that's cool too,
Absolutely, man. Well, let me ask you, man, because I'm always curious about this with you, and it kind of ties into where we're talking about how you've been consistent through the years. Yeah. The one thing that hasn't been consistent through the years has been the lineup. You've changed guitarists and drummers, and you're constantly in motion of developing the band. How difficult is it to stay consistent when you're changing members and you're having to learn new guys and learn how they work with you and you with them, through the years?
Well, it's never easy. I mean, when a band member whom you've worked pretty hard at, developing a certain camaraderie and making records with, and creating music with, sort of falls out of the lineup, it's very difficult to patch things up and to move forward from there. Thankfully, we've been able to do a pretty good job of it, because we've had the sort of advantage of being surrounded by really good musicians, being that we're on the road so much. Mm-hmm. So we've developed friendships with really great players along the way. And when an unfortunate circumstance arises, such as somebody having to drop out of the band for whatever reason, we've been able to pick up the ball pretty pretty, I can't say easily, but more easily than a band who wouldn't have all of these sort of contacts,
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Well, Gary, let's talk about the new record, The Final Revolution. Certainly hits you like a hammer to the face. Very, very, very. Not that any of them aren't emotional, but this seems to be one of the more emotionally charged records of your career, man. What's going on with you, and I guess what you're looking at as you look out there that's creating these themes to be so brutal?
Well, I the past few records before The Final Revolution, they were more collaborative efforts in terms of songwriters. So, I certainly had my hand in those records as well, but you sort of had a mix between my writing style and, speaking for the last couple of records, Marshall Stevens and Adam Phillips, who was very instrumental in writing a lot of the riffs for Straight to the Dome. So we had this variety, and for this album, I took on all the writing duties alone, and my writing style, I guess, is perhaps a little bit darker, and the tempos are less thrashy to a certain degree, and a bit more slow to mid tempo. And I guess my writing style is something that old school Pro-Pain fans have been, it's sort of a comfort zone with them, because I wrote sort of the lion's share of the older material. Mm-hmm. And the band collectively thought that in order to make this record different from its predecessor was to really shake things up in the writing department. And I decided to take over the reins. And thankfully, we have good results so far.
Sure. Now, how much of your lyrical, I mean, it's no secret you're kind of a political guy, and I mean, not necessarily a Democrat versus Republican guy, but you definitely write based on what the political landscape is developing, whether that's kind of Illuminati or whether it's political or whichever direction people tend to associate your lyrics to. That just seems like how you write. Is it getting to a point now, and I'm going only on a guess here with like the title, The Final Revolution, and with some of the lyrics and some of the songs, that you're almost seeing an end game type of a scenario playing out?
Well, I think as far as the political landscape goes, I'm certainly no fan of the two-party system that we've had in place, throughout modern times. So I think that the things that we've been writing about for a long time, the political landscape is sort of turning into that. And a lot of people are starting to really get more independent with their voting record, and they're getting away from this two-party system too. And so we're seeing all of these things develop, and I think there are some positive changes taking place. And what we do is with our lyrics is we sort of approach it as a commentator would. So we're not trying to instill any beliefs into anyone or preach to anybody. I think that's sort of it sets a pretty dangerous precedent. And the last thing I want to do is preach to the choir. I think that's sort of an exercise in futility. Mm-hmm. So I just, call things as I see them, and I like to bring things to the table, hot topics to the table, to sort of induce discussion and debate. I think that's sort of the first stages of change, is that, you bring about a collective to discuss issues, and you try to figure out collectively how to change things in a positive direction. And with Pro-Pain, that's what we've been trying to do. We've brought up some pretty not so nice topics, and people have perceived that as, me being some sort of angry guy or some sort of negative person. But no, I feel the same frustrations as somebody sitting on a train going to work and reading the daily paper. They're feeling the same things as I write about. Mm-hmm. And although unfortunately a lot of these people don't have the opportunity to have their thoughts and emotions published. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to do this. And I try to take full advantage of it, and hopefully, one day people will look back at Pro-Pain and say, yeah, these guys, in their own way, they kind of made a difference.
Sure. Now, what do you think is a truer medium for getting knowledge? Do you think that it would be more, I'll say an independent versus mass media? And independent, I mean more like bands and blogs and, people that are not associated with money, versus mass media being, the news networks and, the political words. Which do you think is a more honest representation of what is actually going on?
Well, it used to be independent media, but I think that being that print media is kind of going, it's going out of style, and there are layoffs and print tabloids going out of business like each year.
Right.
Everything seems to be going online, and I think that the independent media has been infiltrated to a certain degree, and you really have to dig pretty deep if you want to get down to the heart of the matter these days, and if you really want to find out your truth, you really have to do your homework, and you have to compare, because not all mainstream media is full of shit. So you have to really take what they say into consideration too, and you absorb all sources, and then you sort of discern what you think is the truth. And you might not even ever get down to it, but I think that we have a sort of an obligation to find out these truths when it comes to things that are a matter of importance.
Sure. Well, Gary, let's swing back to actual Pro-Pain instead of getting into politics. I know you don't want to go too much in there, but
right.
One thing that's no secret about Pro-Pain is that it has always been a DIY thing for you. You've always, whether it was you or the band, you guys always wrote everything, obviously, but then you always. You literally work from release to release by finding the best circumstance for you to release it, changing record companies and doing, distribution deals instead of full on deals and whatnot,
right.
so that you can keep a lot of it to your own, to your own crafting of how Pro-Pain is presented.
Right.
Certainly the industry has changed monumentally since you started. How have those changes affected your ability to do it in a DIY way? Is it easier or is it harder now?
Things have gotten harder because, we used to make a lot of licensing deals that involved record advances and so on and so forth. So, not that those have completely gone away. It's just that, I think on that end, we probably are bringing in sort of, I think around 25 to 30% of what we used to, say, like 10 years ago.
Okay.
So we try to make up the money via other means, such as touring and in merchandise and stuff. But then we find that a lot of the touring market gets really flooded because a lot of the bands have sort of the same mentality, and they want to get out there and make up for that lost money too. Mm-hmm. So, it makes for a lot of traffic out there on the touring front, and it sort of puts the ball in the court of the promoters. So it can be very difficult these days, to try for a band such as Pro-Pain to try to, maintain themselves being a full-time band, and that's sort of our main struggle these days is finding new ways to keep this going, and not having to turn the band into a collective of hobbyists.
Sure. Have services, the new age of services that have arisen, the Spotify, the Rhapsody, et cetera.
Yeah.
Does that hurt a band like Pro-Pain? Does that help? Is it difficult to keep track of it all because you've been on a lot of different labels?
I certainly try not to complain about it because there are certain things that we can't change out there. It's hurt us to a certain degree because things like Spotify, although it's very cool, for the average person to have these things at their fingertips, so they can just type in a song by an artist and be able to play it within seconds. The thing with Spotify is that they've set their own royalty rates, and that's how they're getting away with this thing. Is they're saying, well, we've we have royalty provisions for the artists. But the royalty provisions and the royalty rates are so minuscule. It's like fractions of a penny for a play. And, that's provided that the artist ultimately gets paid. And, what I can say from, all of my experience with this in the whole music internet age is that I've been paid next to nothing for all of this stuff that's taken place. So I would assume that somebody has been making quite a bit of money on this, but I haven't. And, when it comes to all of this activity, whether it be downloading or through legal routes such as iTunes, or streaming audio such as Spotify, I think that it's sort of setting the stage for a lot of illegal activity.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Gary, with Pro-Pain, you have always, and this is no secret, you've always fused like the hardcore aspect of, like hardcore with metal, more or less. Obviously Right. It's always been metal, but you've always had that hardcore side of you that, all the way back to Crumbsuckers days. Do you see anybody coming up on the horizon that's kind of the next wave of that? Because really, after your band and maybe one or two others, there's really not anybody else that I see doing it.
Well, the styles have really changed, over the years, and there are always new and interesting bands coming out of the hardcore scene, and obviously the metal scene. So it's constantly changing. I think that's a healthy thing. I think that if the hardcore scene would just sort of stick to its old school sound, I think it would be just sort of perpetually spinning its wheels. Okay. And the cool thing is that the new sound involves a lot of metal influences, and it's more of a crossover sound. And I think that's important for keeping the music sort of fresh and interesting. Purist music is great. I like old school, 70s, 80s punk rock and hardcore as much as the next guy. But, to mimic that sound now, as far as younger bands are concerned, I think it has its nostalgic purposes, but that's about it. It doesn't really say much for a band's creativity.
Sure. Definitely, man. Well, certainly people can experience your creativity this year on the road, I'm assuming. What's the plans for 2014?
Well, we have a few things lined up for the summertime. We have some pretty big open air festivals over in Europe. And I guess the big topic right now is we're trying to put together a touring scenario for the U.S. It's been a bit too long. It's been over 4 years since our last U.S. tour, and we're talking to some people right now about possibly some dates in late March, and if not late March, then perhaps in May.
Okay.
So that's great for U.S. fans, and again, it's been too long, and we're pretty anxious to get out there and play some shows, at least some regional stuff, and in terms of East Coast, Midwest, and if things go great, then we'll take it over to the West Coast for sure.
Excellent. Well, Gary, new album, as we said, it's called The Final Revolution. What do you want people to know that we didn't already touch on?
Well, let's see. This is our 14th studio album, and so far it's been highly reviewed, and the fans seem to really enjoy it. So if any of the listeners haven't picked up a copy yet, check it out. You can get it fairly easily through Amazon if it's not in your local record shops, if there are any local record shops near you. Right. But certainly check it out, and we hope to see everybody on tour later this year.
Sure. And where do people go online to find out more about Pro-Pain?
Well, our homepage is propain.com.
All right.
And people can find us on Facebook, too, at Pro-Pain Official.
Excellent, man. Well, Gary, you know the drill, man. As a tradition on the show, we always let the artist pick a closing track from the new record and tell us a quick story about it. So what'd you like us to wrap this up with?
Oh, let me see. How about One Shot, One Kill?
Right.
And it's a song about seizing the moment, taking chances, because sometimes in life, that's all you get is one shot. So make sure it counts.
All right, well, let's check it out right now. It's One Shot, One Kill. It is Pro-Pain right here on your Classic Metal Show. Hey, it's Chris Aiken from the Classic Metal Show. Most people know me as the foul-mouthed shock jock from the Classic Metal Show, or the no-nonsense heavy metal critic from pitriff.com. Now you get to learn the other side. My first book, Little Victories, A Tale of Divorce, Debauchery, and Finding Happiness, comes out on January 13th in paperback and digital formats on Amazon and iTunes. It details my real-world emotional struggles over a year that included a divorce after a quarter century of marriage and the death of my father. It profiles things I did right, as well as a bevy of things that I did wrong with the help of alcohol, and how I found my way out of the muck of the emotional state that almost saw me commit suicide. Pre-order your copy of Little Victories, A Tale of Divorce, Debauchery, and Finding Happiness today at www.chrisaikenbooks.com and get in touch with the more fallible side of me, Chris Aiken. Sounds happy, huh?